The opposition's nuclear announcement. Let's unpack it a little to separate fact from fiction.
And now part two.
As we know, in the government's plan, it's about $1.2 to $1.5 trillion. That's an enormous cost. All of that's going to be passed on to consumers. Our proposal will cost a fraction of that cost.
Okay, this $1 trillion figure. It's been thrown out there by the coalition as fact, but it's misleading at best and leaves out the real kicker. The figure appears to be a misrepresentation of data presented in this report, which models a bunch of different scenarios through which Australia can reach net zero. It includes costs for the entire economy. Everything, not just the electricity grid. And it's not all that relevant in the context Dutton was trying to shoehorn it into. As the Energy Ministers pointed out, the Australian Energy Market Operator put the costs for Australia to hit net zero by 2050 at $121 billion, suggesting that the current renewables pathway will cost the government more than $1 trillion is just plain false. A fact that even the Sydney Morning Herald has acknowledged. It's funny that the coalition would spout this figure, and this is the kicker, because in doing so they've drawn attention to this report. And this report in no way supports the case for nuclear power in Australia. In fact, this report clearly spells out that there's no role for nuclear energy in Australia's journey to net zero.
And so finally, we come to nuclear. In short, relative to the cheapest nuclear power station that has been built to date, we project that nuclear generation would need to be about 30% cheaper, and renewable rollout would need to be constrained in order for nuclear to play a role, to win on an economic basis in a low-carbon world. And then that role is projected to be modest. This is not a statement for or against a particular technology, rather it is a projection of what it would take for nuclear to be economic in Australia. Manufacturers, installers, operators and regulators will decide whether it will be, as they will for everything.
I want to make sure that the Australian public understands today that we have a vision for our country to deliver cleaner electricity, cheaper electricity and consistent electricity.
The opposition's vision will not deliver cheaper energy. You can read the CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency, Science.
Yes, science!
The CSIRO's most recent GenCost report from around a month ago. It's pretty clear. Solar and wind with firming have the lowest cost range of any new build technology both today and in 2030 under modelling. But if you want to go ahead and pick the most expensive option,
nuclear wiener.
In the top 20 economies in the world, Australia is the only one that doesn't have or hasn't signed up to nuclear energy.
This one sounds like a furphy to me. Sure, plenty of countries in the top 20 largest economies have nuclear power generation capability, but Australia's not the only one that doesn't. Germany have ditched nuclear. Italy shut theirs down after Chernobyl. Indonesia currently don't have nuclear. Then there are the countries that currently have nuclear power but are in the process of phasing it out, such as Spain and Switzerland. On top of that, there are the countries that, while they technically do generate electricity via nuclear energy, the amount that they produce is that small you'd have to question how much benefit it's providing their economies.
As we know, in New South Wales, it's already a nuclear state. Since 1958, Lucas Heights has operated successfully. I saw some talk the other day, what'll happen to house prices? What's happened to house prices in Lucas Heights? They've gone up in a similar way that other suburbs have here in New South Wales.
What has happened to property prices in Lucas Heights? Well, here's a fun fact. Lucas Heights is actually an unusual suburb in that it does not have a residential area. You won't be able to find a house in Lucas Heights on realestate.com, for example. You won't be able to find census data on the suburb because no one lives there. Why? Well, up until 1996, Lucas Heights did have a residential area. However, the local residents, reportedly concerned that their proximity and connection to the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor might be negatively impacting their house prices, voted to rename the residential zone of Lucas Heights to Barden Ridge. For me at least, that seems to have been a fairly good strategy. I'd heard of the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor, but I hadn't even heard of Barden Ridge prior to pulling this video together. Dutton's always keen to point to the overseas experience, so let's have a look at a recent UK study from 2023 that found homes in close proximity to reactors had prices between 14.6% and 25.8% lower than those in neighbouring towns. Another UK study found that following the Fukushima disaster in 2011, property prices in England fell and deprivation rose in neighbourhoods near nuclear power plants. By analysing house prices for the period 2007 to 2014 using land registry and mortgage data, they found that house prices fell by 4.2% on average in neighbourhoods within 20 kilometres of all 8 of England's nuclear power plants following the events of Fukushima. If Dutton's not worried about property prices, maybe he could whack a reactor or two in Dixon or next to one of his $1 million properties. See what impact that has.
This is the Bill Gates argument, which I think is a compelling one. A 470 megawatt small modular reactor requires 2 hectares of land. The similar land size to yield that amount of energy in a solar array is 4,000 hectares or 10,000 acres.
Yeah, so?
Coalition are fond of quoting bits and pieces from Bill Gates, but they always seem to forget to quote what Bill Gates has said about Australia and nuclear power. In a 2023 sit-down interview with the Australian Financial Review, Bill Gates was asked, should Australia be going more for nuclear? His advice, Australia should sit back and watch how the technology develops over the next 15 years. If the technology develops, then it might be worth a conversation. When asked if he thought there was a risk Australia might miss the nuclear boat with that approach, his response was no. Australia has plenty of natural advantages it could capitalise on. I mean, he also said that the cost of electricity here can be low because of both the wind and the sun, but that's not something I'd expect Dutton's going to roll out anytime soon.
Oh, sorry, and when complete. So in terms of the first 2, which we in Ted's and Ted can go into some more detail, but so we say between 2035 and 37, depending on which technology you use.
I covered this one in a previous video, but I'm not sure that anyone believes that the Coalition would have a small modular reactor up and running by 2035, or a large-scale nuclear power plant running by 2037. And yes, the Coalition have said that an SMR could be up and running by 2035, and they've already flagged the locations. Never mind that an SMR is not currently commercially available. Given the hurdles that would need to be overcome, general consensus seems to be that 2040 to 2050 might be a more realistic timeframe to have something up and running.
But if you look at a 470 megawatt reactor, it produces waste equivalent to the size of a can of Coke each year.
Rather than a can of Coke, a reactor would be expected to provide tons of waste per year. I think Dutton fumbled his lines here when trying to reference a statement from the World Nuclear Association website that says on average a person's electricity needs for a year creates about 500 grams of waste, which would fit in a soda can. I guess if you want to go down the Coke can path, a reactor supplying electricity for somewhere like Canberra, for example, might generate around 400,000 Coke cans worth of waste annually. I don't know, I'm happy to go with an actual professor on this one and say rather than a Coke can per year, we'd be talking about tons of waste per year. Waste that needs to be stored safely for thousands of years. Tons of waste that we'd have to figure out what to do with. Hell, they have a hard enough time dealing with the waste from Lucas Heights. For what it's worth, the World Nuclear Association say a soda can of waste per year on one page and a brick's worth of waste per year on another, so there's a bit of a difference there. I also found an old slogan from the Canadian Nuclear Association that said that waste from a reactor used to supply power across a person's lifetime would fit in a soda can. They even had stubby holders printed. So this one didn't come from the press conference, but I'd seen it asked afterwards. Is it true that Peter Dutton said he opposed nuclear facilities? The answer is yes and no. In a sit-down interview with the Daily Oz in March of 2023, Dutton was quite clear that he opposed large-scale nuclear facilities, but he was keen as for small modular reactors by the sounds of it.
I don't support the establishment of big nuclear facilities here at all. I'm opposed to it. But for the small modular reactors, we can have them essentially replacing brownfield sites now. So you can turn coal off and put the small modular reactors in, and it's essentially a plug and play.
Look, you can't plug and play with a device that's not commercially available. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not sure a nuclear reactor's like a computer monitor or a keyboard. Regardless, just over 12 months later, his opposition to large nuclear facilities seems to have disappeared for some reason. For what it's worth, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm anti-nuclear. Technology and science is always moving forward. Technology around small modular reactors may develop to a point where they can be deployed quickly, safely and cheaply. And if and when that day comes, it would be ridiculous not to have an adult conversation about it. But right now, there doesn't seem to be any need for Australia to take an expensive gamble on technology that might or might not come off. In other words, there may well come a time in the future where nuclear stacks up for Australia. But based on all the analysis done so far by reputable bodies, now's not that time.
It's time for an adult conversation.
At the end of the day, we deserve a better standard of debate in this country. We deserve better than the leader of the opposition looking for a point of difference that he can use to stir up some more division ahead of the next election. We deserve more than a thought bubble with nothing behind it.
Once more,